we've tried with a number of couples to work on other things when there still is ongoing problems with sobriety. And what we find is that the couples continue to go back and hash over all of the issues that are coming up from that. So we really encourage them, him at least, we're working with men who are struggling with this, to take that so seriously, because I know their desire is to restore relationships and to move forward into a better life with each other.
Right.
And if that really is the vision, then it's like first things first. We've got to nail this addiction and the truth-telling part, which is actually even more important for a wife, to know that she's going to be told the truth from here on forward.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. My name is Aaron Wellman. For anyone who doesn't know who I am usually behind the camera on the other side, and Randy's usually in my place. I am the director of social media here at Faithful and True, and also the producer of the podcast, and I'm filling in Randy's shoes, introducing our legacy podcast for today. Randy and a bunch of the other members of our team here at Faithful and True have been at the AACC National Conference the past weekend, and so here I am recording the intro to the Legacy podcast for today. And this one is featuring Mark and Debbie Laaser. It's 12 things couples do who do well. So, in other words, what does it look like from a couple who's doing well in recovery? What does that actually look like? That's what we're going to get into today. So, without further ado, here's Mark and Deb Laaser.
Show 100 today.
Mark, I was waiting for the trumpets to blare. This is a monumental achievement for us, show number 100. And, in honor of that, I don't know where the time has gone, first of all. Time has gone very quickly, as we have done one of these shows per week for the past 100 weeks. So we tried to think of what could we do that would be special for our listeners to commemorate show 100. So you reached into your bag of tricks and actually invited a guest that you literally love.
Yes, literally love and live with, my wife.
You better hurry and introduce me.
Oh, that's quicker. People are going, oh, who could that possibly be?
No, Debbie is here today.
Yes, Debbie Laaser is our guest for show 100. Welcome, Debbie.
Thanks. It's great to be here to celebrate with you guys.
I originally thought that maybe Debbie and I could do a little reminiscing about the history of Faithful and True, but then we decided that might bore our listeners to death. So we decided to move on and select a topic that she and I have been teaching now for a couple of years or so after our years of experience here at Faithful and True. And we're going to talk about what couples do who do well. Couples that have experienced the pain of betrayal, the husband's sexual betrayal, some form of infidelity, and of course is all
really, give them a lot of ideas of what we've seen work, and at some point there is going to be a lot of work that they need to commit to, and a team of people that will help them along the way. So aside from having official research, this is kind of our anecdotal research, I guess.
Yeah, anecdotal meaning it's our experience of observing hundreds of couples over the last 25 years, really, And I think partly what you're saying is that our success rate is really dependent on how hard the couples are willing to work, and we'll get into that a little bit, because we have 12 points that we think are important. 12 things that couples do who do well. And don't you like the number 12?
And actually, and I realize there's a second sheet because we came up with several more things that if we have time to get to them, I think they're equally as important.
Well, we could do a second show, I think. 12 is really, I think, about all we're going to cover. Well, we don't want to overload people either.
Okay.
But, all right, why don't you start? The number one thing. We could go from back to 12 to 1 like David Letterman would, but I think we'll just start with number 1.
All right. Well, one of the things I've noticed for sure as we've worked with couples over time is the first and probably most important piece to get to couples work and couples transformation is a commitment to sobriety and ongoing truth-telling from a spouse who has broken that trust. And, we've tried with a number of couples to work on other things when there still is ongoing problems with sobriety. And what we find is that the couples continue to go back and hash over all of the issues that are coming up from that. So we really encourage them, him at least, we're working with men who are struggling with this, to take that so seriously, because I know their desire is to restore relationships and to move forward into a better life with each other.
Right.
And if that really is the vision, then it's like first things first. We've got to nail this addiction and the truth-telling part, which is actually even more important for a wife to know that she's going to be told the truth from here on forward.
That's right. So in other words, if the husband is not sober, then sobriety becomes the issue that they're struggling with. And all of our time working with them is going to be spent on talking about what it's going to take to get the husband sober. And if the husband has been kind of what we call chronically relapsing, it kind of takes the wife not only back to zero, but maybe really below zero in terms of her ability to trust.
Yes, that's what I find. To a point almost of feeling hopeless about that.
Yeah.
When there's too much slipping and relapse, at some point it's not a matter of just going back to go for her.
Right.
What I find is she totally, as well as having a couples piece.
Right.
So what that would mean practically is that we would each have our place to go in counseling by ourselves. And ideally, we would also have support groups or a therapy group that would also help us to grow a safe community for ourselves. So we have others that we can go to and lean on when things aren't always working so well in our relationship. And that healthy community is a really important piece of an individual's work. And then, equally important, is a place to go to work on things as a couple and to work on the marriage. And so those three equal pieces we've found are important to attend to equally. Sometimes couples spend a long, long time working on their own stuff, so to speak. They go to groups, they're in their own counseling, but they have no place to go to work on the marriage. They don't have a marriage counselor they're working with. And we definitely see that things start falling apart. It's real easy to practice being somebody different outside of your marriage, but the most difficult place to practice intimacy issues is going to be with a spouse.
Yeah, so the three equal pieces we've always said is like the three-legged stool. If one of those pieces is not in place, the stool will fall. Back in our early days when we were first getting in recovery, I think, we often talk about this, that I went to individual counseling, group counseling. You went to individual counseling, group counseling as an individual, and then we went to couples counseling and a couples group. So on any given week in the first year of our recovery, we had about 6 pieces of therapy that we were doing. We still, I think, try to remember how we paid for all of that, but I know that's what we did. Any of these pieces I'm just recognizing we could talk about a lot longer, but let's get to number 3, and this is really important for you to talk about specifically. Although I think it also applies to the husbands as well. But go ahead. What is number 3?
Number 3 is what I call closing the door on commitment for the relationship. And I've kind of coined that term, used it in my book, Shattered Vows, a while ago, to mean that if we're going to get to this hard work of being brutally honest with one another about feelings, needs, and thoughts, and so forth. What we know is that at times that will hurt, and it may create pain in us and in our relationship. And if we're used to dealing with pain by running away, so to speak, or threatening that we'll leave, what that ends up doing is it's preventing the other person from really being totally honest because they know they don't want you to leave.
Right.
So by closing the door on commitment, I'm saying that at least for a time, if they're committed to working on this process, we would like to ask them to commit to not threatening divorce or leaving the relationship. Now, we know that is not necessarily something someone can commit to forever because the truth is there are a lot of things that are hinging on whether a person would make a decision to stay. But again, we're asking for a period of 6 months, perhaps, ideally a year or so, to be fully engaged in a process of recovery with a spouse before a decision would be made to leave.
Right. And I think it's also important for the addict, or as we say, the husband, the one who is committed the sexual betrayal, to also make a commitment. I mean, it's part of his actual commitment to sobriety that he's going to close the door on divorce if he's been having affairs or whatever, to stop that, and certainly also looking at pornography and any other kind of sexual behaviors. And sobriety is in one way one of the ways that he's saying that he's closing the door on divorce as well. So, number 4, I can introduce this one. I think both of members of the coupleship, the husband and the wife, need to learn how to be safe people. They need to be emotionally, physically, sexually, and spiritually safe. So we could talk a long time about what it means to be safe in all of those categories. But we've had a couple of couples recently who do actually get into some kind of physical altercation, hitting each other and so forth. And so, couples need to learn how to refrain from any kind of physical violence. Emotional violence, I think, would be name-calling, blaming, shaming type statements. You're a pervert. You're an addict. You're whatever you are. And it's kind of said sometimes loudly, certainly in a demeaning or shaming way. And I think a lot of times in the early days, the wives in their anger are capable of doing some of those kind of things.
Well, we find, I think especially the emotional safety piece is one that we're only beginning, I think, as a culture to accept how hurtful it is. And I'm really glad that we are. I think we've accepted physical, sexual, and to some extent spiritual abuse in relationships. But the emotional one is the one that I think we see consistently, even as it plays out in our counseling room.
Right.
Where the problem with being emotionally unsafe with other people is it creates defensiveness. Mm-hmm. And when someone gets defensive, then they're going to be in a place where they're just interested, really kind of autonomically, they don't even know it, in terms of taking care of themselves. And that's going to mean either kind of fighting back emotionally or turning a person off and withdrawing and moving away. And so when a couple is in that place where all that's happening is emotional abuse is going on or emotional damage is going on between them, then they're also going to be creating defensiveness, which is going to pull them away from each other, and it's going to defeat the very purpose of trying to grow close.
Right.
So we work a lot. I know we do in my women's groups. I'm sure you do in the men's groups about what it means exactly to be a safe person. We were just discussing this in my group yesterday. Blaming came up, and I think we were talking specifically of kind of the words we would be using and how that would show up. And
right.
Women were admitting that when they're so angry and hurt because of betrayal, it's really hard not to want to blame a husband about this and that and the other thing.
Right.
And we're learning how to have our emotions about things and talk about them from safe conversation. And that takes a lot of practice because it's not an intuitive thing we do. I think we intuitively want to fight back or flee to take care of ourselves.
Well, yeah, it's not an uncommon pattern. If the wives are in an angry place and kind of fighting, the husbands, being the fact that historically they know addiction, they're likely to escape and withdraw and leave or get defensive. And sometimes, in some cases, they fight back, and then now we've got a full-fledged fight. Sexually, we like to make the relationship safe, particularly in the early days, by taking sexuality out for a time. The Bible talks about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5. So we need to do whatever we can do to help the couples take the toxicity or pressure or demanding or whatever it is out of the relationship for a time so that we can help them return to healthy sexuality. And then we get to the spiritual abuse part, and I think when I think of this one, I think about the accusations that can happen. That how could you be a Christian? How could you have done these things if you are truly a believer, and that kind of thing. There's a lot of shaming statements that come that have spiritual damage attached to it. So black and white thinking. Last night in our Tuesday night men's group, we were talking about kind of black and white shaming spirituality. Most of the men were talking about it in terms of growing up with that, but I think sometimes we see it in the coupleship too, where that can be the case.
So creating safety, that's one of the things we work on regularly with our couples. And again, I think sometimes I almost make more progress with women individually in our groups where we can practice with other women.
Right.
Again, because coming in and trying to be safe, when you have emotions flowing through you about many things is the most difficult thing to do in your relationship with the person you're closest to.
Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing that these first four are incredibly important. We've got 8 more, and we need to get to them. So, number 5, we say you need to own your own triggers. Now, a lot of people may or may not understand that. How would you define a trigger, first of all?
Well, I would define a trigger as just an emotional reaction to something that's going on in your life, whether it's something you're seeing or hearing or watching. But the way you know you're triggered is that you have emotional reaction.
Right.
And that's the easiest way that I like to define it.
A trigger is really a stimuli or stimulus or stimuli that takes you to an emotional place. And it could be a dark place, a depressed place, an anxious place, or whatever. So when we say own your own trigger, that simply means that I talk about my triggers from my perception of how they are affecting me. If I get into blaming that someone else caused me to feel a certain way, that's not owning my own triggers.
I think also we have an assumption, I think many of us, that if we're married to someone we know really well, or we have a friend who we've shared life with for a long time, that we know each other so well that we can kind of read each other's minds, or we can watch each other's facial expressions and kind of know what they need and what they might be thinking and feeling.
Right.
And I think it's a really dangerous place to get in a relationship, because it turns us into, I think, an expectation of being a mind reader for another person. And the truth is, none of us really have the capacity to do that for someone else. I had a woman last night in group, in fact, who said her husband was really angry with her this week because he was clearly upset about something, and he expected her to know that he was, and to also know what he needed so that he could be in a better place. That would be a dangerous situation, in our opinion, in terms of helping a couple grow closer.
Right.
What we would long for is for him to be able to talk about what's going on, what happened, what is he feeling, what's the meanings he's making out of things, what does he need. When we get clear about those things with each other, then we can truly be better servants of each other. And we don't need to set each other up that if you really cared for me, you would know what I need without my even talking about it.
Yeah, and I think that if we don't have the ability to own our own trigger, then our partners kind of walk around like they're walking through a minefield. They just don't know when they're going to set us off. Number 6, and this is related to number 5, because triggers are oftentimes about earlier pain that was created in life. So in other words, someone does something today that's a kind of a reminder of much older hurt, pain, and woundedness. So number 6 says we both the husband and the wife, need to heal any personal trauma that they've experienced, particularly, the early life stuff growing up in their families, right?
And this is kind of a big category, and this is what takes some time in counseling, I think, is to really explore your life. And what we believe here is that no one has grown up in a perfect family or in a perfect life situation. We're all broken in some extent. We are raised by broken people, and life isn't perfect. But we do want to learn how it's impacted us, and how some of the ways that we've watched life or lived life with others has led us to do the things we do as an adult. And that's really the beauty of understanding our story better, in that we can own that with a partner and know that for some things in our life, we're going to be more triggered about things because of the kinds of experiences we've had in our past. So we all have those things, and what we find is that couples who are willing to look at that and explore their life are much more able to bring those experiences to personal relationship, and to include them in stories we share with each other about why we do what we do.
Yeah. So we have a couples workshop starting tomorrow, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this one, and really a lot of what we've already been talking about in the first 6. We've got 6 more to go, so we need to kind of boogie. Boogie is a radio term for move along. Number 7, we need to be companions. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think ideally it means that we would get back into that place of being allies with each other. I know we were all in that place when we first met, and we fell in love, and we were allies. I'm for you, I have your back, you're for me, you have my back, and we really believe that. And I know that's hard to get to that place when either or both of you have been so hurt by things in the relationship.
Right.
But in a perfect world, we're going to help couples figure out how it is on this journey they actually have a lot of things in common. There are a lot of things, even though their hurts may be different, they still have many things that can draw them together on this journey to be
Right.
companions and to know they're for each other.
Well, actually, I see how these things are building on each other. I think one of the ways to be companions is to both own your own triggers, understand your own personal history, share your own personal history. I know a lot of times in our early days, as you were able to talk about stories from your growing up, and I'm able to talk about stories from my growing up, that's one of the ways we become companions on the journey of healing. Rather than saying, you caused all my pain or whatever, that a lot of my pain is much older even than this relationship. Number 8, this is a interesting one and a complicated one, but we need to talk about it quickly. Then that is that if either the husband or the wife or both have some kind of diagnosable mental health disorder like depression, ADHD, anxiety, OCD, mood instability, or even bipolar disorder, some of the main ones we think about. If you're struggling with untreated mental health issues, it's going to be really hard for you to be in a relationship.
And I think there is some longing that if we bring one of these into a relationship, our spouse will be able to take care of us about that or make
Right.
compromises for it. But truly, if we're going to move forward as a couple, we're both responsible for our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And those are things that are part of our own program.
That's right. Well, number 9, I'm just looking at it, and boy, I would say we could spend a whole show talking about this, and maybe we should. After 100 shows, maybe we could get into some of this more specifically down the road. But number 9 is couples that do well find a spiritual journey together, and they have times when they go to church together, when they maybe read spiritual books together, where they do devotions together or pray together, those kinds of things. I think it's one of the deepest, if not the deepest form of intimacy, and because of that, it's one of the ones I think historically a lot of our couples have a hard time doing.
Mm-hmm. And I would say a part of the spiritual journey is finding meaning for your coupleship.
Right.
I think for couples that look to why is it that God brought them together? How is it that He wants them to serve in the world out of their coupleship?
Right.
And the ones that find significance in that place, I think, are the ones that can learn to also overcome adversity in the relationship, which is going to be a given in any of ours.
Yeah, I was just thinking of one of our couples who is kind of exploring now. And they're both highly successful, but they're exploring the possibility of changing professions, even getting perhaps into one of the helping professions, and it's really kind of a joy to see. But I think basically what we're saying there is that healthy couples that do well do have a vision and a purpose and a plan, and understand God's call upon themselves, not just as individuals, but also as a couple. Number 10, well, this is going to step on some toes, I think, out there in the good old evangelical Christian community, but we are to serve our partners, not submit to them. Can you?
No, I thought I'd let you talk about this one.
Yeah, neither one of us like it, because it's the one we run into trouble out there, because the whole idea of submission is mentioned in scriptures, but I think the Greek words there actually are talking about serving, and also somewhat serving sacrificially. But I think this is one where we were talking earlier about being safe. This is one I know for husbands where they have spiritually abused their wives, thinking that the wives need to submit to them in all things, including sexual things.
Well, needless to say, I think this is one of those where an entire show or month or something could be spent talking about this, because we can get hung up on definitions of words. But I do think ultimately what we're talking about here is we work on ourselves to become a strong individual, that we can choose to give and serve one another out of that place of completeness, not out of need. And sometimes I think submission has ended up being interpreted by women as something they have to do for another person, because they won't be okay if something hasn't been given to them. So it's a different place of relationship, I think, where rather than egalitarian type of relationship, we have kind of a one-up, one-down relationship, if that makes sense.
Hierarchical relationship where the husband's up and the wife's down, or vice versa. Boy, I do think this is worthy of a whole show. Number 11, this seems like an obvious point. They are willing to work on healthy sexuality, and that may mean even seeing specialists who do sex therapy in the Christian community. We have a couple right now who's working their way by themselves on a book on sexual healing, and we recognize that a lot of our couples do have some sexual dysfunctions or patterns of sexuality that are not healthy, and they commit to working on healthy sexuality as they move forward.
So basically, we're trying to work with couples to let sexuality, healthy sexuality, be an expression of their emotional and spiritual connectedness. Yeah. What we find for a lot of the couples that come to us is the reverse has been true. Sexuality has been used as a way of trying to create that connectedness. Right. And for many couples might be the only way they spend significant time together in a vulnerable way.
That's right. So
I think the heart's desire, when we watch them react to what we define as healthy sexuality, is always a kind of a relief, I think, especially for wives, because they know that's what they have longed for. Right. And they just haven't been able to figure out why that hasn't felt like that in their relationship.
Well, number 12 is where we'll end today, and that is this is kind of an important spiritual principle, really, I think, and that is we need to surrender living with a perfect spouse. Now, when we're in the infatuation stage of relationship, like in the first few weeks, months, or even a year or two, I think we all believe that we found the absolutely perfect person, and then that moment comes when the honeymoon is over and we figure out that we're not married to the perfect person, and then we wind up feeling that our expectations have been violated, and that leads to all kind of anger and resentment. So I think it's a spiritual act to say that, no, God has provided us with the perfect partner for us, the perfect companion for us, but they may not be a perfect person.
Mm-hmm. And I think the truth is, if there was such a thing as a perfect person, we would probably have no need for God in our life and our faith journey. Yeah. And something bigger and more powerful and more complete for us in our lives than a spouse that we've married. So right. It's a great thing to think about, and it's a tough one because I think, as you said, when we meet our prince or princess charming, yeah, we believe that they will be everything we ever need for all things in life.
Yeah. Well, I'm not just saying this to be saying this to conclude the radio show, but I thank God every day for giving you to me as a spouse. And I know you're not perfect, but we are, in the most deepest of spiritual ways, right for each other. And
I believe that too.
We have a mission to reach out to other couples. That's one of our visions. I would say this, Randy, I don't know, as we conclude today, we've mentioned several times, maybe we could spend more time on either any of these points. Let me just invite the listeners, if they would like to give us some feedback, if that would be helpful to some of them. I know there's couples out there that are listening to us. If they would like to hear more about this, just send us an email.
You've been listening to the Faithful and True podcast, this legacy podcast with Mark and Debbie Laaser, outlining 12 things couples do who do well in recovery. If you'd like to learn more about what we offer here at Faithful and True, whether it's our workshops for men and women or couples, our individual counseling with wives who are struggling with betrayal, or men who are struggling with sex addiction and porn addiction, feel free to reach out to us at our website at faithfulandtrue.com. We have a lot of other podcasts available there and a lot more information about everything else that we offer. Until next time, have a great rest of your week.